Good evening, folks. Thank you for waiting for us, and thank you to those who are joining us by Zoom and Facebook, and who are joining us on YouTube for your patience. We had a little Ash Wednesday service, and even though it only took me 20 minutes to read through it, it took about 30 minutes for us to actually do the service. So we were not quite as prompt maybe starting as we should have been. But it's my pleasure as the minister of this congregation and as one of the co-hosts of this event, along with Pictou United Church, to introduce you to Matthew Anderson, who is a new friend, a fast friend though, and I'm not talking about how quickly he walks. I have not much experience with that, but we became fast friends almost right away. I met Matthew last September as we joined a group of pilgrims through the Annapolis Valley and spent a week together. And then I read Matthew's book and I thought, this is a really good book. There are things in this book that help me to really understand pilgrimage and relationship with each other and the land. And Mary Beth and I had a conversation one day over coffee and said, what a great book for a Lenten study. So this is the result of that time together. And I'm so thrilled. It doesn't feel like a big crowd, but we have many congregations represented here, and you'll tell the story, and it will, what Matthew has to say will be saved on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. So if somebody wants to see it again, they can do that. So let me tell you a few things about Matthew. I'm not going to say too much because we want to get to him. Matthew has just recently moved here from Ireland, where he was working in Dublin. Was it Trinity College? Dublin City University. And now he's on staff at St. Francis Xavier University doing biblical studies, but he's also the director of Camino, Nova Scotia, and has lots of intimate experience with working with and becoming familiar with the ways of Indigenous thinking and understanding of the land. And he had a great time writing a book with his friend Ray, and I'm just going to let Matthew tell you more about himself and the book and whatever he wants to say. At the end of his talk, he will be selling books at the back of the church. And we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A before he goes back there, but then if you have more personal questions, take your time to ask him those things at the back. Okay? And I'm going to go and get my computer so that anybody who's joining us from Zoom, if you have questions or things that you want, or Facebook, if you have questions or things that you want to, comments you'd like to make, I can sort of track those so that at the end of the questions here, if there's other questions, we can have those. All right, Matthew, thank you for coming, and it's all yours.
Thank you. You can hear me okay? Can you? All right. So I'd like to start with, I want to firstly acknowledge that while I wrote this book largely with Ray. Ray was on the coast in British Columbia. Yeah. But I was in Ireland, which is not treaty territory of any sort. But I want to acknowledge that right now, well, it is actually, Ireland is, as you know, probably has been a hugely disputed land all through its history, and thinks of itself as one of the only colonized territories in Western Europe. So there's a whole history, of course, there as well. But I want to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, and that it is unceded. I always try to make sure to say that because it's unceded. It's shared by treaty. And that is our home and treaty land, one of the things that Ray really brings out in this book. So this is a book that was created, my relationship with Ray was created over many, many breakfasts in downtown Montreal, actually. And he would be coming to either to speak or to speak with, to visit with his family. And we would meet at Café Universel in downtown Montreal. And after a while, we would be talking about treaties, and we would be talking about understandings of land. And the idea for the book came up at some point as a conversation that carried on the conversations that we had over breakfast. But a story that I'd like to tell first is a story about a pilgrimage, a walk, that we initiated, that I initiated with Professor Sarah Thoreau at Montreal at Concordia University. And we initiated from walking from Old Montreal to Ganawagi Mohawk territory. Do you know where Ganawagi is? Any? Some of you do? It's on the, if you're in Montreal, it's on the other side of the Mercier Bridge. But you'd be taking your lives in your hand if you tried to walk over the Mercier Bridge. Anybody who's crossed that bridge knows it would be awful to try but they used to actually walk it. So we decided we were going to walk from Old Montreal to Ganawagi. As the crow flies, it's not that far. You could probably walk it in 4 hours, something like that. But we decided we wanted to make our students do a little bit longer a walk, so we thought we were going to go across downtown through Point St. Charles and over through Verdun and across the Estacade, which is the ice bridge, and then onto the bicycle path and on and on and on. And this seemed like a really good idea until we got to a little community called St. Catherine, or St. Catherine, on the South Shore. And I think I tell the story in here of how we decided, well, the city hall was right there in St. Catharines. And St. Catharines is the suburban community that is right beside Ganawagi. Ganawagi is a Mohawk town, as I said, but it's got the feel of a village. In fact, there are no house numbers in Ganawagi. And I asked Kenneth Deere one time about this, and he said, you don't need house numbers. If you don't know the house number, you shouldn't be going there. Which is kind of a small town attitude, isn't it? If you need to know where you're going, you'll already know where it is. This town of St. Catherine is right beside Ganawagi, and we had figured out how we were going to lead our students. We thought, okay, we know the route from Old Montreal, we know the route through all of these other areas, we know the route across the river into St. Catherine, but we did not know how to get from St. Catherine to the neighboring community of Ganawagi, the Mohawk territory. So we thought, okay, what we're going to do is stop in at the municipal office. Now, is anybody here a municipal politician or a bureaucrat? Because there are really wonderful, I've discovered since moving to Nova Scotia that people in town offices can actually be quite helpful. But that wasn't always my experience in Quebec. So we went into the town hall, and Sarah and I, and we stopped and we said, okay, we'd like to take a group of students from Concordia downtown. We're going to walk all the way here. It's going to take us some time. Now we'd like to know, how do you walk, where's the path from here to your neighbors, to the Mohawk community right next door? And the woman said to us, there's no way you can do it. She said, there's no path. And she did that thing that sometimes you get in Quebec where it's, psst. No, there's no way. There's no way. Forget it. And she said, impossible, on peut pas y aller. And then we looked and he said, well, look, on the map, you're right here, and they're right there, and the river is right between you. There must be some way to walk. And she said, impossible. And then she said, we're going to have to bring the police in on this. And that scared me because I thought, it's bad enough to have a whole bunch of city bylaws and stuff maybe in place, but then I thought if the police come, we're going to have to stop traffic. It's going to scuttle the whole thing. So we just said, okay, no worries, no problem at all. Sorry, this was a bad idea. We'll just stop here in St. Catherine. We were making excuses and backing out the door like you do. And when we got out the door, of course what we did is we looked on Google Maps and we said we're going to walk from here to there. And Google Maps gave us a little route along the river, and we went down, and about 4 minutes later, because we were in a car, we were in Ganawagi. There was a path. The path went right along the river. So the problem wasn't a lack of a path. The problem was the lack of a relationship. And how often is that true? In all of our lives. For so many reasons. So, I learned that day that if we made a path and developed a relationship, we could bring our students along with us. And we walked that route from Old Montreal into Ganawagi probably about 5 times in total. But we only did it because of somebody called Kenneth Deere. And Kenneth Deere is I actually saw him on Facebook the other day. He was in Geneva. And he was accepting, I don't know if you saw that on the news lately, that the Haudenosaunee have received items from a museum. So Kenneth was one of the people who received them. And it was so nice to see him again because he was our key to being able to walk to Ganawagi. So one of the things that I learned, and that probably many of you already know, is that the key to walking on the land together is developing relationship. And that, as often is true in small towns, once you know somebody, you get to know somebody else, you get to know somebody else, and soon you may be involved in some way in the community as a known visitor, as somebody who can be a friend. So now, that's one thing about the community, but maybe, can I tell another story? Okay, since I was just thinking about that walk, I wanted to say that I wanted to say something about our students. Our students were, for the most part, between 18 and 21. They were in far better shape than I am in my early 60s. But they complain a lot. You know, they just complained a lot. And we had to walk across this pavement. So you spend most of the day walking, on pavement. And they're going, is this pilgrimage? It's on pavement. Like, it's not pilgrimage. Pilgrimage should be through the beautiful country lane, listening to the birds sing, all of this stuff. So no, but it was construction. It was downtown Montreal, all of this. We're detours, all of this. And we get through all of this stuff. We get across the bridge, dodging cyclists coming by us. And we finally get onto the bike path, and it's beautiful. And we're walking along this kind of earthen path, and you turn and you can look and you can see the skyline of Montreal in the distance. We had the St. Lawrence River there. Some of the students took off their boots and kind of waded into the river a little bit to cool their feet. This felt like real pilgrimage at this point. And then we kept walking on the St. Lawrence Seaway, along the St. Lawrence Seaway, and they thought, this is finally it. We're in nature now. This was urban, now we're in nature. And then we got to Ganawagi, and the students tell Kenneth and other of the Mohawk, it was great. It was kind of tough walking through Montreal, they said, but it was really nice once we got onto the natural part of the seaway. And the Mohawk said, the natural part. They said, you know when that was built? My students went, it was built? They said, yeah, it was built in the 1950s. And then they said, do you know whose land that is? Or do you know what you were walking on? And the students said, oh, it was great. There were snakes, there were little prairie dogs, there were flowers, there were boats off in the distance. And Kenneth and some of the others said, yeah, my family had a farm right there. And it was expropriated. And in some cases, not all, but in some cases, people who refused to sell were taken away by the police so that the bulldozers could come in. And then that land was dredged up, and they said that beautiful natural path that you were walking on, Those were our farms. Those were our houses. And I think that says something about how colonialism works. Because my students are not evil people. They're not bad people. They're good people. Good kids. And they were enjoying something that was good and natural. And they could enjoy it because they did not know the history. And that's like so many of us. We can enjoy so much about this country, about Canada, in part because we don't know the history. And once we know the history, it gets harder to enjoy. Not impossible, but it changes the way that you enjoy it. It doesn't change, for instance, my pride at being a Canadian, or it does change it. It doesn't mean that I'm not proud to be a Canadian, but I'm now proud in a different way because I know some of the stuff that has happened. And that's created a kind of an unhomeness. Freud has a term called, in German, I think it's called unheimlich. But it's unhomeness, uncanny. The term for uncanny is also unhomeness. And I think that that's an interesting term because once you realize that a residential school, for instance, is somewhere and that there are children's graves there, or once you realize that, in my case, that my grandparents came from Norway and settled on land that had been taken away from others just so that they could come, it changes your sense of comfort. And what happens is that you go, okay, I'm still happy to be here, but now I know that somebody paid a price. And that's the kind of thing that Ray talks about. Ray is actually far more, Ray is a great guy. He has a really sneaky sense of humor. Sometimes I will not know that he has made a joke until, about 10 minutes later, and I'll go, wait. He is a very gracious person. He's Cree, Nahiao, and he is from Treaty 8, which is the land that now also northern Alberta, central to northern Alberta, sits on. I'm from Treaty 4 originally, which is southwest, southern Saskatchewan area, overlaps with it. Has anybody here been to southern Saskatchewan? How many people have flown over southern Saskatchewan? Yeah, that's what most often happens. But it was Ray who said to me at one point, he said, people are always asking me what treaty I am. He said, I'm Treaty 8. But he said, you're Treaty 2. And he was pointing to me across the eggs, He said, you're Treaty 2, you're Treaty as well. And I said, oh yeah. And he said, you're Treaty 4. And he said, when you introduce yourself, remember to say, I'm Treaty 4. Because that's the reason why you're here, is that somebody made a treaty. That's what allowed your grandparents to come. So some of these things all went into this conversation about this. And I'm particularly proud. I'm proud for many reasons for this book. But I'm mostly proud that Ray consented to have a conversation with me and consented to have me respond to his talks. And so he would talk about things like indigenous Christians. He would say, for instance, Ray is a Christian. He's ordained into the Anglican Church. And he would say that people come up to him all the time and they say, how does it feel to be indigenous and Christian? And he said, my answer to that is, he said, if somebody like you, he was talking to me, he said, if somebody like you asked me, how does it feel to be indigenous and Christian? I'd say to them, how does it feel to be European and Christian? Because, of course, what that comment hides is the fact that, in my particular case, being from a European background, my ancestors adapted Christianity. Jesus didn't wear starched shirts and have short hair. Jesus didn't, now, the reverends tonight weren't wearing the fancy clothes, but the alb and the various paraphernalia. A lot of that stuff comes from Rome, frankly. It comes from Roman background. It's a Roman tunic. And the Europeans, that wasn't Jesus, that was the Europeans adapting the faith of Jesus for themselves. And so Ray says, quite rightly, when we adapt by using drums or by using smudging or by using some other ceremonies, we're simply doing the exact same thing from our culture that your ancestors, Matthew, did from their culture. Or an electric guitar in worship, or guitar of any sort, frankly, in worship, is an adaptation, a cultural adaptation of the faith in Jesus. And so cultures are constantly adapting. So he says that he always will say, how does it feel to you? I'm thinking of, I might just keep telling stories. I don't know. I could say something about walking. Should I say something about walking? All right. Many of you, how many of you are walkers, like walk quite a bit? Okay, so you know. So I'm preaching to the converted here. But let me remind you of what you already know, and that is that the world looks different at 3 miles an hour. Doesn't it? Because you get into the car, as I did to come here. Maybe you're listening to the radio. I set it on cruise when I came down from Antigonish. And you just cruise. You're going down the highway. I mean, you're keeping an eye out for deer or something, but essentially you're listening. Your mind is kind of half gone. And that is something that I call vector travel. I don't know if you've heard that term. But if I say to you, how far is it to Halifax? How far is it to Halifax from here? Yeah, that's vector travel. That is vector travel right there. Because the distance is not as important to us as the time. If I say, how far is it to Vancouver? We go 4 hours, maybe. I don't know, is that how far it is to Vancouver? From Halifax, is that from the airport? Longer than that? Okay. How far is it from Montreal to Ottawa? 2.5 hours. That's how we tend to answer with hours. And frankly, indigenous people do too, because they're also driving, Ford F-150s. They tend to answer that way too. But when you walk, it's 5 kilometers. It's back to that. When my parents went to school, they went to school on horseback. And so their way to school, to the country schools that they went to, was measured by stone piles, or measured by coulees, which are like little valleys, were measured by a grove of trees. And that is how you measure by distance. And each one of those places was marked probably by memories. Oh, that's the stone pile where that family used to have the farm. Somebody said that to me, by the way. Has anybody here been to Pomkit? Do you know Pomkit? Okay, I live just past where the old co-op was that you have, where the turn is just past the co-op. That's the way, I'm already talking like a small town person that way, because where the co-op used to be is where you turn. And what are you doing when you say that? You are attaching the direction and the travel to memory. And we do that when we invest a place with importance. This church, or your church, if it's not this one, is invested with memory. That's why they're so hard to do anything with, churches, because they're so invested with memories. But walking allows us to witness the memories of places. When we walked along the St. Lawrence Seaway, we witnessed the destruction of those farms because somebody told us about it. Where in Saskatchewan, when we walked north from Swift Current to Battleford, we were walking along the route that Otter's troops were taking against Riel in the resistance. And we stopped some of the places. And if you look at them now, they look kind of featureless. But they had memory attached to them, so they mean something to us. If you, I mean, I know that places here, right here, are invested with that kind of memory. There's somebody here from Marigamish, or people from Marigamish. So there's Camp Geddes, is there? Is that the camp? I mean, it's not the only place there, but that's one of the only places I know. And I know that that's been there for many generations or decades. So I'm sure that it is invested with memories. People go by and go, oh, I remember being 14 and in love at Camp Marigamish. Or at Camp Geddes, I mean, at Marigamish. So when we walk, we remember place. And it's very, very different from something like when you go into an airplane terminal, even Halifax, although it's a small one. When you go into Halifax, what do you expect to see? You expect to see the same things in every other terminal. There's a departure gate, there's a Tim Hortons, there's a bathroom, there's a luggage thing, and that is space. It's kind of utilitarian. But place is something that has memories, has feelings attached to it. And when you walk, you relive that. So I am, as the director of Camino, Nova Scotia, I'm learning about a bunch of places. Last fall in the walk that we took together, we started at Grand Pre. And of course, there's all kinds of memories attached to Grand Pre. You've got that statue of Evangeline right there. But then we walked and we went to Wolfville. And there's a whole other set of memories attached to Wolfville. And then you keep going, Kentville, Berwick. Have you been, you know the Berwick? Yep. The camp. And how many memories are attached to that place, and on and on and on. So one of the things that, that Ray and I talked about is how memory, when you walk, you are building relationship with the land. You have a relationship with the land. And if you build relationship with the land, you will treat it differently as a relation than you do if it's a resource. And so Ray says that when you make treaty, when we as settlers or settler-descended people, when we remember that we are still on one side of a treaty, that our relationship is not just with Indigenous people, but with the land that they shared. Now you have to stop me because I'm a university professor. I could just keep going. Okay. Walking yourself homeless. How's that? You would think that the majestic snow-topped peaks, the rushing mountain streams, flower-filled meadows, and the deep blue-green fjords of Norway would call out to a Canadian whose grandparents came from that country. For some reason, they didn't. In 2013, I received a grant from the Concordia University Part-Time Faculty Association that allowed me to join a group of 5 other Scandinavian background Canadians as trekkers on the St. Olaf Way. So this is true, I did. In 2013, I walked 200 kilometers over the spine of the mountains of Norway. Absolutely stunning. Gorgeous. Have you been to Norway? Yeah, okay, so you know it's beautiful. Beautiful. The St. Olaf Way is a medieval pilgrimage route resurrected and reposted a few decades ago. Several routes to it. The route we took was the Oslo-Trondheim path. We started among grass-roofed log buildings at Dovrefjell. So the place where we started actually had the grass growing on the roofs of the buildings. I half expected to see a goat. I'm sure goats do go sometimes up there. It stretches 200 kilometers or so northward along the spine of the mountains. It was late spring. We spent a lot of time fording high-altitude runoff streams. Unfortunately, we were a little early, I think. We had to jump a lot of streams. And sinking our boots into fields of muskeg. There is no word for the Norwegian countryside except stunning. Imagine having your lunch on top of a mountain in brilliant sunshine, eating your sandwich and then leaning back into pillow-soft lichen for a quick nap. The forests were lush, green, and quiet. The mountains were magnificent on clear days and magical in the mist. The towns were colorful. This is my family's history. My father's parents both came, one from north of Oslo and the other from Trondheim. It was a tough walk and a strikingly memorable pilgrimage. Surprisingly, though, what it wasn't for me was a homecoming. Even though I was raised with Norwegian foods, like lefse and open-faced herring sandwiches, even though I remember my grandparents talking to each other like the Swedish chef, you know, from the Muppets. That's what my grandparents actually sounded like. And even though I grew up going to a church called St. Olaf's, can you imagine? That was my church growing up. Within 5 minutes of stepping off the plane at the Oslo airport, I knew I was not Norwegian. And all of the Norwegians knew it too, I can tell you. And they knew it, they didn't even have to wait for me to open my mouth. They knew it from the clothes I was wearing. They probably knew it from the way I was standing and walking. Our clothing, our accents, our habits, even our senses of humor showed that we were Canadian. This is the dilemma of being a settler descendant in what is definitely not a new world, but which was a new world to immigrants like my grandparents and their families. The old world is gone, but once the truths of colonialism are recognized, the new world is less than comfortable. It is a state of being that is at the same time both profoundly troubled and quite troubling. When the treaties are not respected, we Canadians are left more homeless than we would like to admit. This is probably why, by the way, so many of us grew up. Maybe kids don't do this anymore, but in my generation, we grew up saying, oh, I am Ukrainian Canadian, or I'm Scottish Canadian, or I'm Irish Canadian, or I'm whatever it might be. That hyphenated identity thing, did you do that? Maybe not in Nova Scotia. You know what? That's a more recent settler thing out west, probably. Yeah, probably it is. But once the new truths of colonialism are recognized, our new home is less than comfortable. We're sometimes left homeless. In this chapter, I'd like to argue that going through that unease, that unhomeness, is a necessary step of learning a more justice-filled place for ourselves in this land. And when you walk, walking is one way of familiarizing yourself in a different way with the land, as you know, because you're walkers. When you do that, you see the flowers, you see the trees, you sometimes see the foundations of old buildings, whatever they are, and know who was there previously, and you embed yourselves in the landscape in a different way when you walk. In this particular picture, that's me on the left. I didn't choose this cover. The publisher chose this cover, but he found the picture on my website. And that's me on the left because I was lost. We were walking across the prairies, and it was extremely hot, probably about 33, 34 degrees. And we, at the time, had to carry all of our water for the day. There was no support vehicle. And we had spread out. And one thing, you know, you think that the prairies are flat. They're not, actually, not completely. They may only have a rise and fall of, 15, 20 feet. But if you've only got a group of 5 people and you're spread out across a quarter kilometer, and there's a rise and fall of 20 feet, it's not that hard to get lost. And this was just before I discovered a large stone. We were walking with a Métis fellow walker, and again, this tells us something about learning something. We came across a stone that was probably from here to maybe you in length, and about this high, something like that. About the size of a Toyota Corolla. But the sides of the stone were absolutely smooth. So it was a piece of granite sitting on the prairie, and the sides of the stone were absolutely smooth. You could run your hand across it like this and just feel like, not like my chin, but like a baby's skin. Do you know why? Do you know anybody else? Century after century of bison rubbing themselves against that rock. And I saw that and I thought, oh, that's really nice. And I walked by it, and Richard Kotowicz, my friend who's Métis, he said, stop. He said, this is a grandfather stone. And we honor these. And he had a bit of tobacco, and he took the tobacco and he put it down. And he said, and when we honor this stone, we also honor the missing bison. And pray that someday they'll be back. And that was his prayer. But because I was walking and taking time, I was able to sit with him for a while and learn something about the land that I didn't know before, about these grandfather stones. So in this book, you'll learn something about that from Ray primarily, and then questions that I will raise from it, from learning from him. I could talk all night, so I won't. Yeah, Q&A. It's great. Yes.
Gather it up and take it home.
Yeah.
I find it so hurtful. There's no respect.
Yeah. It's because you have a relation.
I have a relationship with the woods. I do.
Yeah.
I have a relationship with God in the woods.
Yeah, of course.
That is, but I do.
It's not silly at all. What I've learned from indigenous thinkers is this three things. Land. A relationship is based on land. They always say at the very beginning, here's where I'm from. Land and story and relation. Land, story, and relation. So next time you're walking, I bet you there are some stories around those woods. Around those trees. And you're making them by walking. You're making some stories.
Because of what's come into those woods, I have to wait a while until what's happening there leaves, and then I'll go back. But I do miss the woods.
That's the story. Yeah.
Yeah, in your book, I think you talk about the treaties are our origin stories, kind of on top of your story about not feeling at home in Norway.
Yeah.
You want to tell folks about that?
Thank you, Philip. That's really helpful. Appreciate that. In the liturgy, for those of us who were part of the service, there was a line in the service about cosmology. I don't know if you remember that, but there was a line in the service about cosmology. And cosmology is what's our view of the world. And Ray says, one of the wise things that he says is that treaties should be our origin story. So that people like me, whose background comes from Norway but don't feel Norwegian, what's my origin story? It's found, Ray says, in the treaty. The treaty commissioners made treaty with, in this case, with the Mi'kmaq in this land, the peace and friendship treaties. And because of that, that's our origin story, if you're not indigenous. It's our origin story. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Just, can you comment on all my relations and how it seems to be all across the country?
Yeah, the term all my relations, Ray says that it's probably Lakota, but I've heard it from Anishinaabe and other people as well.
You said Nogama, you're Mi'kmaq.
Oh yeah, right. So all my relations, and that's a way of remembering all of the people that we're kind of in an interconnected web with. I thought that the liturgy again tonight did a really nice job, because we have traditionally in Christian thought too often thought of, and you know this, of the land as this thing and we're up here. And it's like, we can take it, we can destroy it, we can use it, we can dump it back, we can do anything we want with it. Whereas if you're in relationship with it, if it's Mother Earth, it's one of our relations. It's part of all of our relations. And as Ray says, how can you own your mother? You can't. You can't own your mother. You come from your mother. It's because of your mother that you exist. Your mother is not always easy. I think Ray has, I don't think he said that in the book. But a person's mother isn't always easy. And in other words, the relationship can be tough sometimes, but it's always a relationship. So thank you.
I like the part where you talk about stories and journeys coming from the same place, you know, a place of security and well-being and all this, and then you go out and into the unknown,
Yeah.
and you never know what you're going to find. And I mean, I've always known that the elders, that's how everything was a story passed down and that.
Yeah.
And I think we're losing it even more with electronic, the age that we've become in and that. But, you know, you can think back to some of our great storytellers that we've had.
Yeah. I don't know if you heard that, but the idea that,
Repeat it again anyway.
yeah, so that stories and journeys have the same arc. You know, there's a reason why Odysseus in the Odyssey, it's his journey of trying to come home, and it makes a great story. Thelma and Louise, the movie Thelma and Louise, is about a road trip. And so many, if you remember in the 1960s especially, so many stories were basically road trips.
I think you talk about The Hobbit,
Yes,
Lord of the Rings, you know, and some of those.
yeah. The Hobbit is a really good example. And in fact, the subtitle of The Hobbit is There and Back Again. But you notice in The Hobbit that the Frodo, I think, or is it Frodo or Bilbo? Thank you. Bilbo is changed by the journey. He comes back different from when he left. And that, of course, is the way, even a short walk in your woods, or if the rest of you who walk, doesn't, you know, you walk out and you're not, it might be subtle, it might be small, but you will come back slightly changed. And sometimes maybe you'll come back greatly changed, depending on what you've experienced. We go on holidays. You know, if we're lucky enough, we go on holidays somewhere, and we come back changed by that trip in some way. Stories are very much like journeys, and the elders, as you said, they tell the story as a way of emphasizing that we are changed in that way. Paths, by the way, are interesting. I don't know if I said that in here, but we use, in English, we use the same words. We use path, trail, track. If I say track, to me that means something a little rougher. Does it to you too? No. No? A track is not rough? Or running track. Okay. Track. T-R-A-C-K. Track. Oh. Because sometimes we had to cross rivers out west, and you would always follow the cattle, because animals are smart. They know the best place to cross. So you cross on the track, but track is kind of rough. To me, path is a path is kind of gentle, and a trail, or a garden path. A path could be a garden path. But as somebody called Robert Moore once said in his book, even though we use these words interchangeably, there's quite a difference between lying down in an elephant's path and lying down in an elephant's track. The words can mean different things. Questions or comments, maybe from your own experiences? Where do you best like to walk? But what and is that?
It's trailed.
Trailed. And is that New Glasgow area or? Pictou. It's beautiful trails in Pictou. Where about some of you? Where do you like to walk?
I walk every day around town because if I want to get out to the woods, I'd have to take the car. So,
Yeah.
but I try to observe everything around me about the trees,
Yeah.
about around the houses, if a house has changed or
Yeah.
what has changed
Oh, yeah. The evidence is there. Yeah, absolutely. And it can be urban. It does not have to be in nature. Yeah. Where, where,
Follows the bay.
Yeah, tide comes in twice a day, so some of the time
True.
just happen to see the tide coming in. It's a trail along where the
Train
train
tracks
track
used to
used to
be.
be
oh, yeah.
turned into a walking
The
trail.
foxes and eagles and
Lots of eagles.
all kinds of things.
Nature.
Yeah, I mean, and you begin to understand your relationship more if you see these. Um, we now live in Pomkit, but we were in like right downtown Dublin for many years, and we always got clogged pipes. You know how like things, because it was an apartment building, and we thought, no, we there's this awful stuff that cleans the pipes, but it's really bad for the environment. And you would go, oh, well, maybe we have to use this because the pipes are so clogged and clogged and clogged. Anyway, we came here to Pomkit, and we have a septic system. And we have a little bit of the bay at the foot of our bay, and we can see eagles. And one day I watched a river otter play down there. And we pulled out this terrible toxic stuff at one point because the drains were plugged. We looked at it, and we thought, no. Because you could see exactly what was going to be affected. And that is the relationship that you get when you walk, even in town. You develop a relationship. You see what's affected by your actions. What about the rest of you? Where do you like to walk? You folks back there. Yeah. And it changes according to the season, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And after Fiona, maybe a bit of a change after Fiona? Yeah. But you know then. Yeah. One of the great joys for me about, it's kind of funny being the director of Camino Nova Scotia when I'm just new. Because what's happening, of course, is that I'm getting to know Nova Scotia by walking the trails or being on the trails with people who are locals. And I'm looking forward to getting to know Cape Breton because two of our walks this summer will be up from the Canso Causeway to Inverness, or sections of that. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to getting to know that land. But I will get to know it because of walking. Yeah. Any questions that, I can't answer for Ray, but I hope that I was clear about some of what he talks about.
We'll be able to ask Ray questions
Oh,
on the
yeah.
8th of March.
Perfect. I thought that it was really nice. I hadn't known about the treaty days when they get $5 bills. And he said that, he said Canadians should have these too, these treaty days. And I've always thought, why don't we have a treaty day? We should. I mean, the same day we should be whatever the day is. And yeah.
It's a lovely book,
Oh, thank you.
very much. Lots of information in it. Just love the way it was written and the language. It's very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more question about, as treaty people,
Yeah.
when we begin a walk, a pilgrimage, should we do ritual and ceremony? Or is that appropriation? Should we do smudging?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I personally don't myself unless somebody has told me to. Somebody indigenous has told me to.
Yeah.
So, for instance, when we first arrived in Nova Scotia, I really felt like I would do something from my own Christian background. I wanted to do a ceremony, so we were thinking about doing something that would be like a blessing of the house, or a blessing of the land, and a prayer for the land that we had arrived at. But my friend, Louise Haff, who is a poet, she had said, make sure when you arrive that you put down tobacco close by the water. And so I did, because she had told me to put down tobacco close by the water. And then my wife Sarah and I had just put down the tobacco, and a huge bald eagle just floated over top of the house and over top of our heads, and then went. And we thought, my goodness, because of course the eagle is the one who takes the prayers to the Creator. And we thought, how beautiful, how incredible. And it took us about a month to realize that eagles are fairly common in Pumpkin. But that was the first one that we saw, and it was when we put down the tobacco. In general, I know two different Mi'kmaq people, one of whom says settlers should never do smudging because this is our ceremony and you do your own thing. And then another Mi'kmaq person who says, no, everybody should do smudging because the world needs more harmony and peace. And so of course they don't, the community is diverse and they will give you different answers. But in a case like that, my preference is to be cautious. Yeah.
Cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
Pictou landing, if there's something going on and the community is invited in, and there is a smudging ceremony, they don't just invite the indigenous, they invite everybody to come and do the smudging.
Yeah.
Take part in that ceremony, so.
Yeah.
But that's different because they're inviting them.
Yeah. Yeah.
As opposed to you
And-
doing it.
Yeah, and it's being led by, yeah.
And I did find there is a section here about protocols in interacting. I found that very helpful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, good. Yeah, waiting to be invited. But then Ray does say, for instance, that that dancing, the dances or the powwows, he said those are always intended to be open. And so do that. And then also that indigenous culture is so widespread. Thank goodness for the CBC, because there's so many different ways that we are now being exposed to indigenous artists and musicians and so on. And that's one way to passively learn about some of the people in your area. And I know in Pictou, for instance, that you have that artwork. So there are people here from Pictou, yeah. So you have that beautiful artwork in your meditation garden, yeah. So there are ways to invite people in, and if you're doing an event at the church, maybe there is an indigenous caterer that you could hire. Maybe you could have a bannock meal one time, and that starts to establish the relationship. It doesn't mean that they have to cater all of your events, but you do it once, and you establish that relationship, or you invite an elder. And elders are quite busy, so they may not be able to come, but you can invite. Or you go to once you make personal contact, then it becomes easier to invite because they know you and they trust you. And I know that you folks are already along that way. So I think that I might be done. Should I say something about the other book, which is very different? So the other book that I have back there is called Pairings. And it is pairings, P-A-I-R, pairings. And it is not something I want to, I don't want Ray to be associated with that book at all. I mean, not in a bad way, but it's my thing. And what it is I took biblical passages that I loved. And I said, if you were pairing that with a drink, what drink would you pair it with? One alcoholic drink and one non-alcoholic drink. So I did that. And so I have 10 biblical passages, and they are each of them paired with a drink. And so, for instance, the book of Joshua is paired with gin and tonic, because gin, and especially tonic, was the drink of the British Empire. And Joshua is about colonization. And so that's one. And of course, the Genesis is paired with apple cider. But I talk about the history of apple cider slightly. And the last one is the book of Revelation and Bloody Caesars. So anyway, that's what that other book is back there. And it is not the same kind of book. It's a very different kind of book, but it is a Bible study kind of a book in a fun way.
I don't want to cut off conversation, but I do want to honor time commitments, and I do need to go to the mic. There is time for further conversation with Matthew over book buying and book signing and book conversation, so we'll invite you to do that. Just a reminder that, as Donna noted, our next gathering is on Wednesday, March 8th, and we'll have Ray with us via Zoom. And so we're looking forward to that conversation. And then we're still working on our speakers for our final session. So hopefully by March 8th, we'll know what we're doing, and we may have to do some shifting around of plans depending on what happens in terms of our speakers. But I certainly want to thank each and every one of you for being with us tonight here, and those who joined us online through Zoom and Facebook. A good way to begin this season of Lent, a season of pilgrimage, of seeking and listening. I don't know if before you came here, you might have been like me, scrolling through a bit of news feed. And one of the pieces of the news feed that came up for me was from our moderator, the Reverend Carmen Lansdowne, and the United Church of Canada, and some of the initial revelations that are happening around the Alberni residential school and the former site, and the uncovering. I'm not going to say discovery, because we knew that the graves were there, but the coming to new light around the unmarked graves, and at the moment 17 have been identified. And so we certainly live in the legacy and into that history, and a history that some of us is new, and in the last couple of decades or so, and that is new in terms of history for us as we come to realize the impact of residential schools. And for members of the United Church of Canada, the Alberni Residential School was one of the schools that was run by the United Church of Canada. So I just thought it might be appropriate just to read a few words from the moderator in light of what the preliminary research and the unmarked graves. The Right Reverend Carmen Lansdowne writes, "The Church will not look away from the truth that continues to be uncovered. The United Church of Canada continues our commitment to live into our apologies, to be accountable, and to further the work of truth, reconciliation in concrete acts of justice." And so it feels right that we're here this evening. It's about concrete acts of justice, and listening and learning and pondering and being together, and to share our stories is part of that learning. So thank you, Matthew, for being with us. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being in relationship with us, that we might be in relationship with one another, and indeed with all peoples and all creation and Creator. And so a small token of our appreciation for being with us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, and we'll continue conversation over books and signing. And pairings. Donna will be getting the Bloody Caesars out in a moment.